anti-Semitism in Europe. And I have two very capable people who will be my guests today. My name is Mojmir Kallus. I serve as the Vice President for International Affairs at the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. And we are going to speak with a Jewish guest from who lives in Paris and a Christian who lives in Germany. And I'm sure they will provide a very comprehensive look at this very disturbing phenomenon. But before I go on and introduce them, let me just share a few words as an introduction. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is nothing new in Europe. Throughout the centuries, when Europe was called a Christian continent, it was also the hotbed of anti-Jewish prejudice and persecutions of Jews. That was because early in church history, the teaching of contempt, as it is called now, took root when Jews were portrayed as the arch enemy of God, the Christ killers, people whom God himself rejected, and people who Christians should persecute. Now we can say with regret that this teaching completely ignored the message of the Bible, including the many promises of restoration of the Jewish people, which are explicitly confirmed in the New Testament. And worst of all, it made God a liar who will not keep his word. And it wasn't until the late 20th century that this deplorable theology was finally shelved by most Christian denominations. And unfortunately, this theological foundation created a fertile ground for many violent acts against Jews, and they were sometimes accompanied by wild folk or pagan anti-Semitism. Let me just say a few examples of what happened in Europe throughout the centuries. We are in the year 1095, when Pope Urban II called on Europeans to liberate Jerusalem from the hands of the Muslims. But many people soon said, why should they travel thousands of miles to the land of Israel when infidels, non-believers, were much closer to home, namely the Jews? And that started a series of mass murders, we would say today, pogroms, perpetrated by mobs, especially in Germany and France. Then another catastrophe struck Europe in the 14th century, the Black Death. And again, this plague, which devastated millions of people, devastated Europe, caused Jews to be accused of causing it. One popular story suggested that Jews poisoned water wells to infect Christians, despite the fact that Jews were also dying from the plague. But people believed the story, and as a result, thousands of Jews were massacred, and whole communities were wiped out across Europe. And so we can go on and on, century after century. Jews were accused of ritual murder, that is, using the blood of innocent Christians to bake the matzot. And don't worry that the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, completely forbids Jews from eating blood. They were accused of abusing the host and tormenting Christ anew, as it were. Don't worry that they do not believe in the Christian doctrine of transubstantiation. Jews became the embodiment of the worst evil of the time. And no matter how bizarre the accusation, people were ready to believe it and act upon it by killing Jews. Then when church lost its influence in society and enlightenment set in, Jews hoped that they would be now treated as equals. But soon, different type of prejudice emerged. Jews were finally given freedom to practice any profession and enter all walks of life. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them quickly succeeded in the rapidly changing environments of the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s. Some of them gained prominence in business, became successful, and here again, they were accused of this is the birth of conspiracy theories, which live until today. At the time of rising nationalism in Europe, again, 19th century, Jews were one minority which did not have a land of their own. They didn't have a language of their own. They were scattered across countries. Naturally, they have bonds among themselves, that went across national boundaries. So they were accused of being cosmopolitan, liberal, even communist. And in those days, that again represented evil. That was the time when Theodor Herzl came with the idea of a Jewish national revival, similar to the similar movements in other countries. And it scored a spectacular success. The Jewish nation was reborn. The state of Israel was born. There is again a state of the Jews after 2,000 years, but the Jews are again going against the mainstream. They are today accused of being nationalistic, even fascist, while the new elites are busy erasing borders and national identity. So we have this pattern, the worst evil, which today seems to be racism or colonialism. Well, this is again attributed to the Jews. The Jewish state is called colonialist, even though it is completely out of place. The Jewish state is called apartheid, racist. Why? Whatever is the worst evil at a time, it is always attributed to the Jews. No matter how bizarre the accusation, people seem to be still ready to believe it. And I will stop here because this is the time for entry of our distinguished guests who will tell us about the latest trends in Europe, about some of the constituting streams of anti-Semitism, and also what kind of development they see over the last few years. So let me introduce them. First, Dr. Shimon Samuels. He serves as the Director for International Relations of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and he's based in Paris. He is responsible for issues of contemporary racism and anti-Semitism in Europe, Latin America, and also in international organizations. He was born in England, holds degrees in international relations from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, from London School of Economics, and from Keio University in Tokyo, and the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Shimon Samuels, great to have you. Welcome to this webinar. And you need to unmute your microphone.
Okay.
Now we can hear you, yes. Now again. Now you are, yes.
Okay, very good. So thank you to you and to David Parsons and the Christian Embassy in Jerusalem who invited me, the ladies, gentlemen, friends. I put a little subtitle before because I like and hope that it'll become clearer in due course. And that is, the Lord took us out of Egypt with a clenched fist and an outstretched arm. And I would like to talk mainly about the outstretched arm later, okay? As you said, I was born in the UK weeks after VE Day. I grew up with a respect for water, the 30 miles of channel that saved us, and the 330,000 British Jews listed in the Wannsee Protocol. I think that you have that in our PowerPoint, if you would like to show it. And in the Wannsee Protocol, there were 11 million Jews in 33 countries that were listed for extermination. And today, the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans cannot defend continents from hate. We are all tripwires for one another. I opened my office in Paris in 1980. In fact, it's the same year as the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. On the eve of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, I visited a prominent Israeli journalist, Tamar, living on the corner of the Rue Copernic in Paris. Her house guest, Eliza, the wife of an important filmmaker, had just arrived from Israel. She asked Tamar, anything needed for dinner? Yes, a few dates. Go down with Shimon. He will show you the fruit shop near the synagogue. At the corner, I continued straight. Eliza entered into the Rue Copernic, where minutes later she met her death. Next morning, Prime Minister Raymond Barre announced a bomb set for Jews killed 4 innocent Frenchmen. Actually, the death toll was 1 Portuguese delivery boy, a late worshipper, Eliza, and 1 innocent Frenchman. At first, the government blamed the far right. We saw the prince of the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine Special Ops. Kopernik launched 2 years of 73 shootings and bombings of Jewish and Israeli targets across Western Europe, 29 in France. I tabulated them. It ended in August 1982 with the Goldenberg restaurant massacre in the Jewish quarter of Paris. And the question is, why did it end? An Israeli incursion into southern Lebanon, it was called the bus attack, made European terrorists in Palestinian training camps flee home. And once home, they forgot the Jews. They needed money. And they began attacking banks and embassies and military bases. French, Italian, German governments cracked down, showing the truth of the late Simon Wiesenthal's note. What he used to say was, what starts with the Jews never ends with them. So in this we end the first wave. Oh yes, I'm sorry. So ended the first wave of anti-Semitic terror. And we can fast forward 30 years. I was in Ottawa. Hassan Diab, the only suspect for the Kopernik bombing, faced an extradition procedure for trial in France. After 2 years in France, he used a window of opportunity to escape back to Canada, while an appeal against him was still pending. A few days later, we saw in the newspapers he was back in Ottawa with his family, a hero for the Palestinian cause. Now, the first wave of terror was imported from the Middle East. The second was a transplantation of the Intifada 2000 to Europe, enacted by young, native-born and radicalized young people. They were radicalized in mosques, in schools, and they were playing out a game of cowboys and Indians refitted as Palestinians and Israelis. Their local target were Jewish neighbors living side by side in the communist red slum rings around major cities. And then the third wave came, and that included lone wolf jihadis. The next stage in Judeophobia was the UN World Conference Against Racism. And if you can turn to that, this was held in Durban in South Africa just a few days before 9/11. This was the most anti-Semitic hate fest since Nazi Germany. On the Friday night, thousands surrounded the small synagogue in Durban, brandishing banners. Hitler did not finish the job. I was the only Jew elected to the NGO International Steering Committee. And therefore, I participated for the year before in PrepComs, preparatory committees in Geneva, Santiago, Warsaw. I was excluded for the last one in Tehran. And in Geneva, in a debate on Holocaust denial, the PLO legal counsel, a young lady, slinked up behind where I was sitting and whispered in my ear, "We will give you the Holocaust if you give us Palestine." A Dutch colleague photoed my horrified face for posterity. On arrival in Durban, I was expelled from the steering committee to shouts of the world Jew. And in December, 3 months later, I attended uninvited the final session of the committee in Geneva. An 8-point plan, and here if you can please go to the 8-point plan. Yes, that's it. An 8-point plan was on the table and snatched away eventually, and did not, no one claimed paternity for it. But an educational, number one, an educational inculcation campaign through United Nations agencies on apartheid Israel. 2, a legal campaign in the International Criminal Court and countries of universal jurisprudence to arrest Israelis for crimes against humanity. And that is certainly in the works today. Number 3, cancellation of the law of return for Jews to Israel. And 4, its replacement by the right of return for all Palestinians. And then 5, reactivation of the dormant economic boycott. But 6 was cultural, scientific, sports, academic embargoes, now known as BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. Number 7 was rupture of diplomatic relations, rendering Israel a pariah state. And above all, 8 was penalties for states and NGOs refusing to comply. Now, the Durban program didn't die in Durban. It was now promulgated by the Anti-Globalization World Social Forum based in Porto Alegre, Brazil. At the first of such rallies, I stood in a stadium decked out with banners reading, "No Jews, Nazis, Yankees, no more chosen peoples," whatever that may mean, with 76,000 young militants from over 100 countries screaming, "Viva la Intifada Global." It was also very interesting, and I think it'd be interesting for the International Christian Embassy. There was a session for religious leaders on the Kairos document. And the Kairos document had pointed out that chosen people and promised land was colonialist. And so those churches that were there present chose to rewrite it to all of us are chosen. The land is promised to all. It was there that BDS was planned. Each year we would learn the forthcoming campaigns and calendars set to harm Israel and by association, world Jewry and our Christian friends. For example, an early warning meeting of the Gaza flotilla. Durban 2 in Geneva in 2009 and 3 in 2011 in New York were both opened by then Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, spewing Judeophobia and hate. The planning of Durban 4 has begun. It will take place at the United Nations, New York, next September. We wrote to foreign ministers of a dozen democracies, urging them to refuse to participate in this exercise of hate. So far, Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, United States have answered. If there are people present here from Germany or from France and other countries, please join us in this campaign. Durban was stressed by the book of Amos, who spoke of the 3 sins of Damascus. We've already had 3 Durbans, and the 4th, which would see no reprieve, we hope. In January 2015, the murderous assaults on Charlie Hebdo magazine and the kosher supermarket resulted in 17 dead. Here hung a question. Had there been only the Jewish target, would millions have marched and over 50 world leaders arrive in Paris, or would it have remained once more a footnote in the litany of anti-Semitic attacks? But they marched and we joined them under a Wiesenthal Center balloon. You can see the balloon, which says, I am for Charlie, police, and Jews. Now, Charlie Hebdo published cartoons not only on Muhammad, also anti-Semitic cartoons on a regular basis. Jews, however, counterattacked through the courts of law, not with Kalashnikovs. We are the only Jewish organization to go low-tech, monitoring each year 7 Arab book fairs and the Fair of Fairs in Frankfurt. Each year we give a most offensive award. Last year it went to Iran for children's books from the age of 4 to 7, extolling Shahada or suicide terror. An important find on the Lebanese stand was a front for Syria, and it was called the Burak Wall. Unfortunately, I think it's not coming through. But the Burak Wall tells the story of Muhammad flying from Mecca to heaven via Jerusalem. There were no direct flights then, but there he tethered his horse, Burak, to a wall. This book identifies the Kotel, the Western Wall, the greatest shrine to the Jews. And it says that the Jews stole this and it must be returned to Islam. Now, there's a very clever political angle to it. The wall is close to, right next to, the Mughrabi ramp, which leads up to the Temple Mount. If the Kotel, this wall, were identified as Muslim, then non-Muslims would be unable to trespass. And this would be a major entry into the sacred basin for Islam. and also the basis for violence across the Muslim world. Giving a talk like this at the European Parliament, I warned of the danger of such Arab school texts translated and distributed in English, French, Spanish, and German. Apparently, a British MEP shared the message with then Prime Minister David Cameron, who a few days later announced measures. Now we turn to a lesser but much more pernicious form of anti-Semitism, which emanates from UNESCO. The German strategist von Clausewitz said that diplomacy is war by other means. Since the 2011 entry of Palestine, UNESCO has become a battlefield for the ID theft of Jewish and Christian historical sites, especially regarding the Temple Mount. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem was granted to Palestine through a stratagem. A letter was placed on each seat of every state, ostensibly from the Nativity Church custodians, the Copts, the Ethiopians, and the Catholics. The letter was addressed to President Abbas, stating, "We are happy to transfer our church to Palestine." A friendly European government gave me the other original letter. "Mr. President," it said, "this is not the time to change the custody." During the lunch break, I placed the other letter on the tables, but no one backed up the issue. 2 years later in Yerevan, Armenia, I met with the Armenian Pope, the Catholicos, and I was there with a group of 16 people, and frontally, he responded when I asked, how could you have obliged and allowed this theft? He responded that Palestinian campaigners had forged the letter. The Palestinian stratagem is to de-Judaize Jews and Christian history to validate their non-history. Hence, Jesus became Palestinian. A caricature was based on a well-known photo, and we could move to that photo, of a Jewish child, hands raised, facing German soldiers at the fall of the Warsaw Ghetto. The cartoonist placed a keffiyeh scarf, as you can see, on the boy's head and drew a Star of David on the German helmets. With a few brush strokes, very few, the child of the Holocaust becomes the child of the Nakba, the so-called Palestinian Holocaust, and the Nazis become Jewish Israeli soldiers. And those Europeans who look back and sigh, rejecting their guilt for colonialism and for the Holocaust, their two greatest crimes, voila, the Jews are worse than we were. The Jews were worse than the Nazis. So we have ID theft, and you can see that in the Palestine seeks its validation. Supersessionism is a historical imperative. It's resulting in people's deletion from history and geography. In the case of the Jewish people, especially after the Holocaust, delegitimization is a step towards annihilation. And in a taxonomy of anti-Semitism, ID theft may be viewed as genocidal intent to erase the Jewish state from time and space. In May 2004, I was invited by Polish President Aleksander Kwaśniewski as one of 8 speakers on the dangers of joining the European Union. My subject was anti-Semitism, of course. I felt enthusiasm for the European enlargement as a supranational identity is often a factor in Jewish history. The only unhyphenated Czechoslovak, there were Czechs, there were Slovaks, but those who were unhyphenated Czechoslovaks or Yugoslavs were Jews. A Soviet ID was much safer than a document marked Yevrei or Jew. But my enthusiasm for supranational Europe has since been doused by its attitudes toward the Jewish state. Not only the Jewish state, when anti-Soviet heroes who happened to be Nazi sympathizers and collaborators manifested their colors in a growing neo-anti-Semitism. Left to right wings, from the left to the right, wings of populism move to the political extremities, threatening Jewish life and rights. Jews are mainly centrists. And from circumcision to kosher meat slaughter, what is that in relationship to anti-Zionism? The far left Islamist marriage brought out huge anti-Israeli rallies. I walk in the opposite direction in Paris, recognizing as concierge, a bank teller, and by the time they might recognize me, I'm long gone. And I believe they have the right to march, even for Palestine, until Hamas supporters peel away to smash Jewish shops and institutions. That for me is the ritual. That for me is our return to the clenched fist, from the clenched fist to the outstretched arm conundrum. An Israeli father takes his son as a bar mitzvah present on a tour of classical Europe. The father tells his son, outside Israel, most people are not Jewish, they're Christian. At the Parthenon in Athens, the boy asks, Abba, are these people Jewish? No, answers the father, Christians. Same question at the Roman Colosseum. At the Eiffel Tower in Paris at the end of the trip, the child says, Abba, I feel so sorry for these Christians. They are spread all over the world. We need you stretched all over the world. We need you with an outstretched arm. Our sages have long debated two distinct modes of interaction with the world. The first is Am Levad Yishkon, a people that dwells alone, ostracized, marginalized, ghettoized, victimized. That cannot be the future of the Jewish people. And the second is Or L'Goyim, a light unto the nations, a barometer, an alarm bell, a participant. And a couple of examples before I end. The Rwandan government followed the Machete genocide of over 800,000 deaths in 100 days. They held a meeting on rehabilitation, memory, and justice. I sat among an intergenerational gathering of Armenian, Jewish, Cambodian, Bosnian, and Tutsi survivors in a shared circle of communion. Between us, there was no packing order of tragedy, no competition in suffering, no theft from each other's narrative, and a total respect for all the victims. Another example is the 25th anniversary of Saddam Hussein's gassing of the Kurds of Halabja. Anything that has poison gas in it, it becomes a Jewish question, ipso facto. But I was on a solidarity visit and to speak to the survivors and to see if we could find help for 95% today damage to lungs and eyes. I explained, as a Jew, once exiled from the land of Israel to Babylon, here a few kilometers from today's Iraq, we wrote a book called the Talmud, which states, if I am not for myself, who will be? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? We are here for you, just as I believe that you would be there for us. And here, come please to the next slide, the last three slides. That's it. Perhaps an early antidote, or even a vaccine of sorts, is our exhibition, a Jewish trinity composed by my wife, Graciela, then the only high-level Israeli official at UNESCO. People, book, land. The 3,500-year relationship of the Jewish people with the Holy Land, the land of Israel. In 24 panels, from Abraham the father and Moses the lawgiver, to Israel as a startup nation, a land and people of hope. This is our outstretched arm. Through the International Christians Embassy in Jerusalem. If you just can bring it down to the end. Yeah, so this is in the Vatican and this is in the British Parliament. And I think that's where we are. So in this outstretched arm through the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, we are there for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels, for this extraordinary presentation and a tour de force really for our listeners. That has been a great expose indeed. I would now turn to our second guest from Germany, and I just would let everybody know that we are going to have a Q&A session after this next presentation. So anyone who is interested can pose a question on the chat. My next panelist is Mr. Christoph Shwarnweber. He's German. He is a member of the International Christian Embassy office in Germany. He serves as a speaker, political advisor, and a prayer coordinator, and he lives in Stuttgart. And before I give him the word, I would also like to have a personal story which actually relates to both of you gentlemen. Without you knowing it, you both participated in different times in the same event. You both were part of a pro-Israel rally held in Prague, which is one of the ways we are fighting anti-Semitism and making a public stand. Dr. Samuels, you were there in the very first year together with David Parsons in 2004 in the beautiful garden of the Czech Senate. And Christoph, you were there a few years later as a speaker of the German delegation. So I think this is a nice convergence, and it just shows that there is a common thread uniting us all, Jewish and Christians who are here each for each other. So Christoph, the floor is yours. Please tell us what you have on your heart.
Thank you very much, Mojmir. I'm very glad that you mentioned the meeting at Prague, because it remained with a great impression on me. Not just that there is such a meeting and that many people are joining, but also the very bold and frank, direct way of speech that the Czech politicians participating had. I'm from Germany. I'm used with very diplomatic speeches, very nice words that there is not always a lot behind. And this really remained in my mind from the time in Prague, that the people in Eastern Europe, they always like to say it a little bit more clear. And when it comes to Israel, I think this is also very necessary. I first want to give thanks very much to Dr. Shimon Samuels, not just for his input now, but as a German, I want to tell honestly the fact that the Simon Wiesenthal Center is publishing every year a list of top 10 anti-Semitic persons or organizations. This is really a help, and that moves more in Germany, to be very honest, than sometimes our work, our ministry, our lobbyism that we do. So the fact that the German ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Heusgen, was once on this list, or other German cultural institutions, this really gives a very big public information. People begin to discuss, German newspapers are reporting. Of course, German politicians, then they are rejecting and they say it's not like that. But this is the official way behind the curtains, let's say like this, in the closed rooms. There is an influence of this list that I really want to thank you for what was published in the last years. And I really want to ask you also in the future to continue to publish such a list, and to continue also to name very clearly people and organizations that are working anti-Semitic in this time. And this is really having an influence in Germany. So please give this also to some other people in your board, people with responsibility. It is very much appreciated in Germany what you do. This year in Germany, we have a special anniversary because it is 1,700 years of documented Jewish life in Germany. So there are some documents that show us that in the year of 321, officially a Jewish community in the city of Cologne, in Köln, was recognized by the emperor at that time. So this year, 1,700 years of Jewish life is in a way celebrated. So this is a very official thing, and immediately you will see why I'm starting my speech with this. it's a very official thing. German president opened it officially, and all kind of politicians and important people are participating at all kind of events linked to this 1,700 years. It is also an interesting thing because it shows us then that 1,700 years ago, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was worshipped in Germany, while we Germans have to recognize very honestly that our ancestors and forefathers 1,700 years ago did not go to a church to worship such kind of God, but we were heathens and we were believing in the power of trees and of moons and of suns and of all kind of animistic beliefs. So the question is not, did Germany, the Christian country, receive at one time also some Jews and they could practice their religion? But the question is that how many years later Germans turned to this monotheistic belief, while Jews had this and were practicing this in Germany already years before. So everything in Germany that belongs to Israel, to Jewish life in this year of 1,700 years of anniversary is in a combination with that fact that we celebrate the Jewish life in Germany. So it was really a big shock in our country that even if in the last years we had a growing number of anti-Semitic incidences that were already reported, then in these years, during that 4,000 rockets attack from Gaza going against different Israeli cities, we had plenty of manifestations on German streets where people, so-called pro-Palestinian people, were demonstrating not just that they do not agree with the politics in Israel or that they want to have a free Palestine. This is some things that we are used to since many years to hear, but they were pronouncing hate, they were singing songs against Israel, they were burning Israeli flags, and not just in one city or let's say in one big meeting like we had in the past once a year in Berlin, the so-called Al-Quds Day, where people, especially from a migration background, were behaving against Israel in the past. But it was happening in many, many cities in Germany. Many crimes were happening. Jewish journalists were attacked. There was put fire to synagogues or to very important Jewish institutions and so on. And it was not just a few days, but it was something that was going on for a longer period, showing us the real bad influence that exists in our country. And I have put a link in the chat, and because I'm not sure if it's working well from my computer and my internet connection, I tried before. I'm not sure, Mojmir, if you just can show on this website, there is a movie, a film, a clip. You see already some people with Turkish and Palestinian flags and just need to be put to play. So just to see what was one of these demonstrations. I hope I got the right one.
This is what I got on the link.
Okay, so I'm sorry, there's not something down there.
I don't see a video here.
Yeah, okay, so I will give it just a minute later. Very sorry, there's just a misunderstanding in the copy and paste here. So what was happening is that many people were on the streets shouting against Israel and against Jewish life. And this was really something that shocked us in Germany. Mojmir, on that page, if you go a little bit down, you see a Twitter, and it's from the Central Council of Jews in Germany. The webpage that I gave to you, I'm sorry if it didn't work. I'm very sorry for this, please.
Yes, I'm scrolling down.
And there is a Twitter, or that may be blocked in your country. Ah, okay, I'm sorry. because there is a Twitter movie from the Central Council of Jews in Germany showing.
I think I have it now. Let me just share.
Okay.
Again.
Sorry for the audience for this. We just have to find out how this works here.
I think this is it. So
yeah, exactly. If you can just put the button a little bit. And maybe the sound, I don't know if it's possible. But I can also tell you that people here are screaming very ugly things, shit to Jews. I don't want to use all the words that they use because we are here in the civilized meetings. And this just shall give you a very short impression of one of these demonstrations. And many of these meetings, police was present, was also guarding a little bit, but was not interfering. And this is a really new situation in Germany, again, in that year of 1,700 years of Jewish life. And this really gave a wake up, gave a shock in the German society, led politicians not just to do all kind of nice declarations like this happened also until now, but really now they did something, laws are changed so that anti-Semitic crime and anti-Semitic manifestations can be forbidden or can be punished better. The German government has agreed to ban Hamas flag after anti-Semitic incidents. We have a change of law that people that apply for German citizenship will not receive that citizenship if they participated in anti-Semitic actions. That was in some ways before, but now it is made stronger. And it is also the tendency that even if somebody receives the German citizenship, but afterwards is participating in anti-Semitic criminal actions, the German government should be able to say that when he received the German citizenship, he was not honest to say that he is standing on the ground of the German constitution, but the German government could say then that he is lying, so he can also lose the citizenship. So this may sound not very interesting for many of you, but for Germany, this is a big step because we are a country of immigration and we have a lot of immigration from the Muslim background countries. And we received, for example, 1 million people from Syria, refugees. We have 4 million people with a Turkish, Kurdish background and so on. And German citizenship was quite easy to be received in the last years. And now these things are changed. We also have a new situation that we have the first rabbi that is joining the German army, but not as a soldier, but as a Jewish priest to be a priest, not only to Jewish soldiers in the German army, but to be a priest also and to be available to all people that are participating in the German army. So if you just see the symbolic background, yeah, that is a Jewish priest officially joining German army that was known for all that crimes, then we really have a change here and we really have a lot of steps that German politics tries to do. But nevertheless, we have to recognize that anti-Semitism in Germany is more than just imported. Even if now politicians are more boldly speaking out that we have a problem of imported anti-Semitism by Muslim immigrants, yeah, to be very honest, German in the history didn't need any Muslims to be anti-Semitic. And we have to recognize that according to polls and surveys, anti-Semitism has grown in the midst of our society. Yeah, so that it's 25% of the population that is saying Jews have too much power in the world, Jews have too much influence over the German government. So if you see that there are maybe 100,000 Jews, or it depends what kind of statistic do you use now, and you see there are 80 million people in Germany, how can such a little group of people that even most of them coming from the former Soviet Union states, yeah, they are not a Jewish economy, big players in Germany for the last years, but 90% of the Jewish community in Germany actually comes from the Soviet Union, and they came very pure in the 90s, yeah, and then we have these many Germans believing that they control or they have too much influence in the German government. Then this is something that is really worrying us, and because people are here that are also having a religious and a Christian background, I really want to urge you that we are fighting this on all kind of political levels, but also to see it as a spiritual problem. And I can just ask you to pray for Germany and to help our country, because it is really a shame for my nation and my people that such a behavior is happening on our street. Maybe one last positive thing is that the biggest newspapers in Germany, the so-called Bild-Zeitung and Welt, is run by a company called Springer that was always very Israel-friendly. And during the anti-Israel and anti-Jewish life demonstrations in Germany, the head of Springer, Mr. Matthias Döpfner, he said, "Who is anti-Israel cannot work for us." And he didn't care with this affirmation if this is according to German labor force laws or not. He just said, who is not for Israel, who is anti-Israel, cannot work for us. And you see, I tried to show you some negative things happening. And of course, the numbers are rising of anti-Semitic incidents. But I also tried to show you that at least there is a certain wake up in my country. And we all hope that the wake up will finally lead to the fact that anti-Semitism will not increase any longer, but will decrease, and that more and more people of the society will stand up. We did it with the ICEJ, certain manifestations, other pro-Israel organizations did. We need more of this. We need more that the society is going on the streets with the Israel flag. But it's a long way. And it is good to be joined together in an ICEJ with people of all kinds of countries that are doing this together.
Thank you, Christoph. I think there was a very informative overview of what is going on in Germany. I welcome David Parsons, who recently joined us, and I'm sure he is going to have a question. But before that, I would like to ask my first question, perhaps to Dr. Samuels first. You both already hinted at some of the sources of current anti-Semitism in Europe. Some of that comes from the Muslim world with their prejudice, which sometimes had been borrowed from the Christian prejudice of the past, by the way. And some of them also comes from the extreme right in countries like Germany, with the typical Nazi-type prejudice. That there are also other sources. The current talk about the colonialism and racism, it seems to be coming from the left. How would you, Dr. Samuels, assess the different streams, and if they work in a way together or are separate, or what is the source of the ideological source of anti-Semitism as you see it in Europe today?
I see anti-Semitism as a drop of mercury. If you have this drop of mercury, let's say, on your hand, when it's cool, then it will be flat. If it's warm, hot, then in that case, it will rise and rise almost to explosion. And I think that whatever happens, there is no way to rid yourself of that drop of mercury. It will be there forever. It is our job to try to keep it low. And however, first, we know that social media has changed the world. And where in my childhood, we would see flyers, anti-Semitic or anti-whatever, particularly anti-Pakistani, flyers under your wiper, your car wiper, and maybe that would go to 100 to 200 a day. Today, social media is immediate and it is huge. So that is a major challenge, and I think that to some degree it's a losing challenge, because even if the big boys put to play in, there are so many now that are able, and so that's one of the problems. I think that anti-Semitism is going to be around. Okay, how is it? Why was it around during the pandemic? Because the pandemic was a wonderful opportunity. The Jews, they are buying up all of the vaccines. The Jews are not giving them vaccines to the Palestinians and other neighbors. The Jews are making money out of the vaccine. And I mean, it all goes together. And it's very, very difficult to fight against this type of language. I have a problem also, and it's a problem that many people don't agree with. That is, anti-Semitism is spelt in the main with a hyphen. I in when was it? I think it was 1993. There was the Protocols of Zion was republished in Moscow. And I was invited to come and to talk with the judge and to be like sort of an amicus curiae. And the judge, then we went back into the court. This was just outside of Moscow in a small place called Cheremushki. And I told her that the whole world is watching you because this is where the protocols were written and distributed. And so she gave an order that she would want within 3 months a report on Semitism. Semitism, which would be historic, it would be juridical, it would be psychological, but Semitism. And I took her aside and I said to her, Madam, I mean, this is not Semitism. There is no Semitism. If you talk about Semitism, that means it's the whole Muslim world. So it is anti-Semitism. From that point on, I have no longer hyphenated the word anti-Semitism. So I don't know if that's in any way simple. Now also, one other example, and this pertains particularly to France. Judges today in French courts, they are those who learned from the 1968 revolutionary who became lawyers and magistrates, and this is their next generation. They cannot understand how the victims of racism can also be the perpetrators of anti-Semitism. Mm. And so what we find is, at the best of it, a rotating door where the judge will give a little, snap on the wrist and say, tap, tap, don't do it again. Then we have also, as I'm sure many of you remember, the murder of Halimi, Sarah Halimi, and the fact that everything was crystal clear. The police were there but didn't knock down the door. They heard the killer screaming, Allahu Akbar. He threw her over the balcony, and yet he was freed. He was exonerated due to the fact that he was under the influence of cannabis or alcohol or heroin. It doesn't matter. But he will go home to the banlieue in Paris, to his group, and he will be a hero. And this will be an element that we can, I think, crystal clear, that there will be more and more cases of this type of behavior. Now, I only yesterday wrote a letter to an old friend of mine. He is now 89. But when it happened, he was 84. His son woke up during the night. They lived in just outside of Paris. and he tried to turn the lights on. It was dead. So he went to the door because the electricity box was outside. And 3 burst in with knives and screwdrivers. They threatened to rape his mother. They tied them up, they beat them. And now the lawyers are saying, well, you know, it's only a robbery. Now, all of this has a point to it, because if it's only a robbery, then in that case, there was one level of sentencing. You're soon paroled and out because there were too many prisoners and they want to get rid of them. But also it avoids the what is considered to be the aggravating factor of hate crime. That aggravating factor keeps them in. So from one step to another step in France today, there is a move of the French jurisprudence to the abyss.
Well, that's quite disturbing, I should say. We have an opportunity to compare this situation with Germany because of the different history. It seems to me that the German establishment is still a bit more cautious about letting hate crime go unpunished. How do you see it, Christoph? What is the approach of the German judiciary to hate crimes?
I think the German courts, even if the people are influenced by the 1968 movement, that certainly has its influence in Germany. But I think the German courts are, and the judges are still quite determined to give hard sentences. Speaking generally, there can always be an exception. What I see more a problem in Germany out of the 1968 movement would be the media area, and not just certain television channels or certain websites, but it's a very much left-wing influence on the media. And we could see this also again when the rockets from Gaza came against Israel, but then we could see a certain development which was quite interesting. That commentators sitting in Germany and giving their political analysis about what's happening in Israel, they just gave the normal things that we know, that Israel is guilty and so on. But the journalists that were in Israel at that time and sitting in their hotels and hearing the bombs and seeing the lights on the heaven suddenly changed in their attitude and became more they began to understand more the Israeli position. They began even to defend the Israeli way of doing that before they wouldn't have done that. So that's an interesting thing. Another thing just to mention, because the COVID influence was mentioned by Dr. Shimon Samuels, interesting in Germany was that during the beginning of the COVID vaccination campaign, this sympathy for Israel was growing in a way in Germany, also in the German media, that we would not have dreamed before, because Germans said, our government is not able to give us the vaccination, but Israel is doing it. And these Jewish guys, even if it's not clear what will be the long-term effects of the vaccination, they are ready to be like a testing people for the whole world. So suddenly we had an increase of Israel's sympathy in Germany that we could not have dreamed before. So at the same time, COVID was also used for all kinds of conspirational theories and so on, like it was worldwide. But in Germany, it had a little different effect.
Well, that's interesting. I just would like to add that since we are speaking about Europe, we have covered so far mostly France and Germany. And I would add that Europe is also has its eastern part. It used to be divided by the Iron Curtain, and I come from the other part, and we were looking with admiration at the western part of Europe for many years, hoping to become one of them. And strangely, the situation seems to be changing, and it looks like not all of them, but some of the Eastern European countries and especially my country, the Czech Republic, and also Slovakia, and also Poland and Hungary, and Slovenia, they seem to have learned a lesson from that type of ideology, and they are on a general note more understanding towards Israel. And also this, there are not many refugees from the Muslim countries, for one. The leftist ideology is not so widespread like in the West, because those countries were ruled by extreme leftist ideology called communism. And so what happened, for instance, a few weeks ago during the conflict, and I haven't seen it before, so that, like Christoph says, there seems to be a new development. Mayors of major Czech cities decided to fly the Israeli flag on their public buildings as a sign of solidarity. And that included the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Prague and the Prague Castle, the seat of the president and the seat of the prime minister. And there were many other, symbolic acts of understanding and solidarity. And also even the media was fairly covering it with, at least at the beginning, with a rational approach, and not exchanging the cause and effect as is usually the case with media reporting. So I would say that we do have some hope that if we are active, we can go against this current of anti-Semitism, but for sure it is different in different environments in different parts of Europe. I see my friend David. Would you have a question, David? One of the last questions we have for this seminar.
Yes, good to be here, Mojmir. I just would make a couple comments and see, especially if Dr. Samuels would respond. First of all, the Christian Embassy is called to comfort Israel and the Jewish people, and you can't always persuade all the crazies out there who are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. But if we are able to comfort some of our Jewish friends that they're not alone, that they're not hated, and in fact, the people who used to hate them the worst now love them deeply, this is important for us. And I think it's important, whether in Germany or France or any country, that the local Christians, and especially the local Christian leaders, befriend the Jewish community in their areas and work with them to just secure the place for both our faiths today. Judeo-Christian values are basically under assault in Western democratic countries, and we need to stand together for our rich biblical heritage. And second, I was just on a webinar earlier this week with Chris Mitchell of CBN News. We had Dr. Samuels, your colleague, Rabbi Jonathan Cooper, with us. It was a very good time. But they showed one of the CBN News reports from Auschwitz with Rabbi Lau, who's the chairman of Yad Vashem now, used to be chief rabbi of Israel. And he talked about anti-Semitism being like a spiritual madness. And I really do think that, we're dealing with an irrationality, and it is a spiritual battle. And I think we have to keep in mind that ever since God chose the Jewish people and blessed them for the purpose of world redemption, he said it out there: you need to bless this people because I blessed them. But if you curse them, you come under a curse. And anti-Semitism is a spirit that you either agree with or not. And if you agree with it, you come under a curse. You curse yourself. The Palestinians, by feeding it into their children right now, they curse the next generation. That it's hard for God to move on their behalf because of this. And I think this is one of the aims that people of faith like us need to keep in mind, that some people infected by anti-Semitism, you'll never cure them. You'll never get them to break out of it. But the people that they're trying to infect as well, we need to, pray for deliverance and show mercy. I have, spoken and had people come up afterwards repenting of the things and the thoughts that they had towards the Jews. You're helping deliver them from a curse. We need to keep that in mind. And I know Dr. Samuels, others, we study anti-Semitism and all, but at the heart, doesn't it seem like Rabbi Lau said, a spiritual malady, a mental, and for many people, a mental problem and a spiritual illness?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, David, it's good to see you. As kids, we used to have a ditty, how odd of God to choose the Jews. And the answer was, it's not so odd, the Jews chose God. First of all, I would like to just explain what we do and what we hope to do. And what you heard from Rabbi Cooper is also the same as what we do in Europe. And it's basically, we're looking for the holes in the cheese. Resources are limited. So what we're trying to do is to turn around situations and to turn them around and thereby create situations which are examples that can be followed. So for example, I thought it was, yes, we had about 1,200, 120 interventions last year. It was a difficult year. And out of that, 36% actually changed the situation. Now that's a good threshold. And I think that we would like to consider that anti-Semitism is not just something which is just static. It isn't. Just like we're looking today at Delta and other variants, it is a mutation. And it was Rabbi Sachs who created that question and the answer to it. I'd like to for my Jewishness by asking you a question. And that is an article that came out, I think it was yesterday or certainly the day before yesterday, about how evangelical young people are turning. They're turning away from their religion. They're turning away from the politics that evangelists have carried for years. There is now a turn to the left, and also with it, it turns them away from Israel. Can you, or perhaps one of the others, explain the situation and tell us what is exactly happening?
Yes, Dr. Samuels, I don't put much stock in this particular poll that you're talking about, this survey, which found that within the last 3 years alone, evangelical support for Israel among young adults, young evangelicals, 18 to 29, had dropped from around 67% to about 36%, almost half, cut in half. But that same poll found that around 75% of these same young evangelicals supported Israel, supported Jerusalem as the capital of Israel only, which is one of the real litmus tests of whether you're pro-Israel or not. So I don't know the methodologies and such used. I know here in Israel, there's several academics trying to use it as a club against Netanyahu, who's just lost power, saying you bet on the evangelicals and you put us in danger by alienating the American Jewish community, which tends to be more liberal or on the left. And I think there's too much evidence out there. There is a problem among young people in general and young Christians. that they're really interested in social justice these days. They see Palestinian suffering. They just don't know yet that it's not so much Israel's fault, that it's Palestinian leaders causing it. As they get educated, as they get older, they sort of tend to become more conservative. And I do think in America in particular, some of the young Christians were like me. I grew up in the Bible Belt. I grew up with dispensationalism, a certain type of Christian view that really focuses on the dark side of prophecy, Armageddon, the Antichrist. It sees 2/3 of the Jews dying here before 1/3 finally call on Jesus. And it's I was sort of turned off by that thinking, and I think a lot of young Christians are still turned off by it, and they eventually find, through efforts like our organizations or others, that there's a different approach to Israel that is based on faith in a God who promised long ago the land of Israel to the Jewish people, and Israel's restoration today is just evidence of God's faithfulness to keep his promises.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think we need to come to a close. Let me just summarize by repeating or going back to where I started. And David just hinted at this theology of replacement that dominated the church for so many centuries, and which made the Jews the scapegoats for all kinds of evil. And indeed, the spirit of anti-Semitism is like a malady, like something that blinds people. So I quoted several very absurd and bizarre accusations, and people who are infected with this spirit, they just believe it blindly without, even questioning the rationale of it. But fortunately, I believe that we have seen a major shift in the Christian theology over the last century. And undoubtedly, the restoration of Israel and the Holocaust have both contributed to some soul searching on the part of Christians. And I would say, and as I'm traveling around the world, I meet Christians, evangelicals in many countries, in not only in the West, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in Oceania. They sincerely love Israel. They are free of this replacement theology, which is a fertile breeding ground for all kinds of anti-Jewish sentiment and prejudice. And so I believe there is hope. But as we are a Christian organization, I think that we have to be active. We have to, especially in Europe, use all the ways we can, be it political lobbying, be it political or public demonstrations, writing articles to the press, doing what we can to counter that wave of anti-Semitism. But first and foremost, we need to pray, because the root cause, as we believe, is spiritual, and that is the first way how we can tackle it. But anyway, I would like to thank very much our speakers, Christoph, for giving a great snapshot of what goes on in Germany, with some positive and negative signs. We know how to pray for Germany. And Dr. Samuels, thank you very much for your overview and for your very informed presentation. It's a great honor that we can work together, and I'm looking forward to many more opportunities of meeting and speaking and doing things together. And thank you, David, for your contribution as well. So this concludes our webinar. I thank all of you for your interest and for your participation. And we are going to see you certainly in many other occasions. We are running these seminars every week with a lot of interesting topics. So with that, I just wish you blessings from Jerusalem. Shalom and goodbye.